Happy Saturday, everybody. I'm Nick Slavik. I am the host of Ask a Painter Live. I'm also the proprietor of the Nick Slavik Painting and Restoration Company. We are getting very close to the 5-year anniversary of the Ask a Painter Live show. That means every single week for 5 years, 52 shows a year, rain, shine, snow, travel, whatever else. I have done this show. In 2 more, it's going to be my 5-year anniversary. Look for something special coming up there. This is a weekly live Facebook show where I use my over 2 decades. I'm in my 29th year of practicing the trade now to answer any of your questions, share my perspective, and learn from all the people on this show here. So today's show, very special. We are in the midst of a monster historic restoration exterior. And I'm basically going to walk you through some of my theories, give you all my perspective on doing this stuff, and then take any questions you guys have. And it can be about historic restoration. It can be about something else. First off, I want to thank the PCA, the Painting Contractors Association. Yesterday was the start of my traveling season. We have been working all winter, especially Nigel, Marcia, Sydney at the PCA. We have been plotting and scheming and planning to get my master's classes on the road. So harken back to a time before COVID when I used to gather in front of somewhere between 50 and 300 people at a time in these big pro shows, gatherings, business building events, and teach contractors about the coding science and the business side and entrepreneurship and hiring and estimating and business professionalization, systems, processes, all that good stuff. And, COVID kind of put an end to that for a while, and people weren't willing to gather 300 people in a room together. But now, until we can get those big gatherings together again, myself and the PCA partnered up. They're doing logistics on these events, and then I am going out there presenting all of my master's classes. So I have about 12 master's classes in total. I added 3 more already in the start of this year. We've had lots of time to sort of plan and get together and get data. And I debuted a brand new master's class in Nashville yesterday. It's basic business professionalization. Now, this seems dry as burnt toast, but honestly, it's a step-by-step guide going from I started my business to I am now a professional business. I have systems and processes in place. I can hire people if I want. I can stay single painter if I want, but you are now a professional. You can make data-driven decisions. And this is not complicated. This doesn't take money. This takes time. And that's what lots of young contractors have right away. So I would argue, wave the magic wand over the entire industry. Obviously, you would start with job costing, but job costing is part of professionalization. If you take the basic steps to professionalize your business, every single question you have about running a business, and it doesn't even have to be just painting, it's trades, it's other small businesses. Think of all the basic questions contractors have. What do I charge for X? How do I know if I can hire people? How far should I be booked out? How do you schedule? Should I hire a production manager? When can I get out of the field? All these can be answered by job costing and business professionalization. So I laid out that plan yesterday, presented to this group, and I really thank everybody for their feedback there. I could not be more appreciative of all the people who came to Tennessee yesterday. Tennessee, I had to blow in and blow out. Tennessee is a beautiful place. It's an absolutely beautiful place. And it's one of those things, when I do my master's classes, I promise my family lots of family time on the weekend. So I flew in late last night in order to be here on a Saturday with them. But when I go do these master's classes, I put a pin in the map and say, all right, we're going back there and we're going to do it leisurely this next time. So my brother from another mother, Chris Moll, flew in as well too. Even though we talk regularly in Minnesota, he loves this stuff. He loves Nashville. So he was there. We had the Kuipers who hosted us. Matt and Maggie are some of the most substantial people I've ever met. The Elliots, Chris and his wife were there too. They came in, and again, insanely substantial human beings. The Marlers were there. Just awesome people all around. I got to meet some people from Harpeth Painting. Sherwin-Williams stopped by. It was just an awesome day. So, all right. Sorry, just looking at comments here. So today, but I want to thank the PCA. Marcia, Sydney, Nigel are putting in a lot of work to get these things lined up. Basically, if you want me to be somewhere near you and give master's classes, all you have to do is raise your hand, signify that you're interested, notify me, Marcia, or Sydney. Marcia and Sydney at the PCA, and we have a plan to get it all rolling. We have a template. We have the logistics all taken care of. You just raise your hand. We'll figure it out from there. And let's see, next week I will be in Washington State. I believe that is a sold out one, but there's a waiting list if you want to get in case there's any last cancellations. And then in early June, I'm doing a Northeast tour. So I'll be spending at least a couple days in Vermont with Noah Cantor, which will be awesome. Very special project we're actually going to be doing together. We are going then to, I believe, Boston, New Hampshire, and New Jersey as well, too. So thank you, everybody, for hosting. Tom Lopatoski, Nigel Costello, Dave Scaturo, Noah Cantor, all that. And then more dates after that to come. So we're working ahead probably about a month. I'm getting content created for these things, and we have a whole bunch of master's classes. Basically, everything you've ever wanted to know about this, running a business or painting, I have a master's class for that I can at least lend my perspective to you. It may not be the end all and be all, but nobody's got more data, nobody's got more experience, and nobody's put it together in something like this. So from IG, I will be in Edmonds, Washington. So this next Friday. So, all right, folks, we are going to talk about exterior historic restoration. It is fresh in my mind. We put in a lot of hours on one last week. I actually cleared my schedule out for 2 weeks to lead my painters on this historic restoration because I have lots of experience with this. I also love them a lot, and I want to get my hands on these houses. So let's talk about exterior historic restoration. All right, so I'm going to share some things with you guys. So this is our project right now. This is the Big Green Restoration. This is in Lesueur, Minnesota. I've known this house since I was a very young child, probably 30 years. I had relatives who actually owned a restaurant across the street from it. So when I would drive to this town as a kid, and people on IG, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to Facebook to see my screen share of all this stuff. I'm going to actually be showing you bits and pieces of the house and things like that. So Big Green Restoration. When I talk to the client, her wishes are to obviously preserve the house, put her little spin on the color. It had probably been, I think she had mentioned, it was somewhere between 25 and 35 years ago that it had its last professional paint job done. And I believe at that time, she said she was not very pleased with it. So she's owned this home for at least 50 years. She knows lots of the history of it. She is a firecracker. She takes care of this house, and she is a go-getter. So it's really fun to work with people like this. I love old house people. So basically, this started last winter when, you know, she asked for an estimate. And obviously, this is one of those things where there's Andy, my estimator, Andy. Love Andy. He's out there doing most of the bulk of the estimates. I still take care of some of the legacy accounts that we have, the big builders and the huge historic restorations, things like this, government work, whatever. It's a little more complicated, time consuming, and that's sort of what I'm set up to do. And so, yeah, we had a few consultations right away to kind of walk her through the process to see what she was interested in. And she was interested in basically restoring the entire outside of the house, including, you know, carpentry, a little bit of window glazing, lots of repairs, lots of epoxy stuff. There's birds kind of trying to make their way into the eaves of the house. So yeah, we laid it out and we discussed over the winter. She accepted the bid. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take this time to do something very unique in my business. And we are a training business. I want to train my people because we have a very rigorous apprenticeship program. Most of the people in my company have not done a historic restoration of this size. Most painters have not done a historic restoration of this size. I have done many, many. So I love these things. I know that this is basically the proverbial eat an elephant thing, where it is a monster project. How could you possibly do this? There's so much work to be done. Where do you start? What do you do? How do you make sure it's good? When you've done a bunch, you understand it's the eat the elephant thing. One bite at a time, get your head straight, no more head trash, and just approach it very methodically, like it's 10 little tiny houses all together. So basically, people have been wanting a color reveal on this house. We have tweaked the color a very tiny bit. As far as I can tell, I've been doing my research on this house when we started trying to come up with a color scheme. And on these, I always consult on the color because I have lots of opinions. I have lots of stuff going on, and I really want to make sure that we honor the house, but also honor the client's wishes for the house too. So kind of, you know, walk that fine line between those things. As far as I can tell, there are some other colors on this house. It's very likely that the dark green you're seeing on this porch skirting right here was probably on some of the windows here and there. Not all of them. A couple of the big stained glass windows. Some of them are, 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide, give or take. Most of the house was this color or some derivation of this color, but it's very close. There is a little bit of white here or there, a little bit of pink here and there, but I've seen that before as different stages of maybe primer and things like that. But as far as I can tell, this house has always been this mint green, sea mist green color. And there's a lot of people, it divides down the thing here. A lot of people hate it. Sea mist green. It feels like it was a mistake from 1977. It is not a mistake from 1977. This house was likely built in the 1880s. It is a stick Victorian or an Eastlake style home, which are some of my favorite ones. They have so much ornate little trim, all hand done, wood pegged, joined together by hand. Beautiful house. One of the first historic restorations I ever did was this white one here. This is the Bohemian Bed and Breakfast in New Ulm, Minnesota. And this is the same thing. This is an Eastlake style stick Victorian house. People think that these gingerbread houses and these houses with all this crazy trim, all these little details everywhere need to be 14 colors. That was not the thrust of this style of home. Queen Anne style Victorian, and they label a lot of styles of home based on the royalty in England. So we have Edwardian homes, King Edward. We have Queen Anne style of Victorians. We have Eastlake. Charles Eastlake was actually a designer, and I have many of his books right here. But he had a particular kind of intricate designs on his wood. These houses, believe it or not, whether you want them to be this way or not, were actually made to be very monochromatic, because the theory is, like the big white Bohemian mansion that you're seeing here, there are so many beautiful little intricate pieces of trim. You could put 14 colors and gold leaf and all this stuff on there, but once you go past this point, you actually muddy up all those beautiful little bead boards and trims and lap siding and chamfered edges and balls and bullseyes and things like that. When you paint it monochromatic, you see the shadow lines of every one of those little intricate changes, the derivations of the siding, and it actually plays better sometimes. So it depends how big of a purist you are. So I'm a purist in the fact that when we're done, I want it to feel like it's good for the home. I'm not a purist where we must always do that. We have to use milk paint. We have to use linseed oil and lead. We have to do a horsehair brush. I'm not that big of a purist. I want to honor the house. And you also have to remember, in the 1880s, not everybody knew everything and was good at their job. Sometimes dum-dums made choices. And we think, well, that person knew everything. They were a historian of the time. They knew exactly what to do. They don't always know what to do. So what I like to do is honor it. When you step back from a historic home, you should be like, yes, that's good. It's interesting. The client's happy. It honors the house. It feels good. My last historic home that we sold this last year, it was a beautiful 1918 little craftsman cottage, and it had been white its entire life. It was monochromatic, just like the Bohemian mansion that you're seeing on the screen here. I could tell that there was some blue and some black sash paint along the way. I don't know if it was ever a cohesive thought there. So me being a semi-purist, I researched with primary research in these things. This is actually a house catalog. You could order a house from 1922, 1923. This was actually printed in Minnesota. This is 100-year-old house catalog. You can see the beautiful binding, the string, and everything else. These are original color templates from that. And you can see the floor plan. It's a style number. You can look back on these things and see the actual colors that they were doing at the time. This is primary research, original materials showing you that. The one big pet peeve I have about old house people, and old house people, I love you. I am a utilitarian old house person. I've restored my windows. I've put in brass weather stripping. I've done sash cords. I've done all the crazy stuff that you have to do as a crazy old house person. I've refinished all the floors in my house, repaired plaster with actual plaster, stripped woodwork. I mean, you guys saw me lovingly restore all these historic doors from a school in my house. But you old house people have a lot of old wives' tales that you guys follow. Everybody loves linseed oil for some reason. Linseed oil will ruin a house faster than just about anything. It's not a preservative. It'll rot. Nothing sticks to it. A lot of people have a lot of misbeliefs about color. They think this big ornate house should be a whole bunch of colors. It should not be a whole bunch of colors, technically. You could certainly do it. If Mrs. Roberts came to me and said, Nick, we're doing gold leaf in 14 colors. And I said, you know what? I can make that work, and we will find a respectable way to do that. But a lot of people have a lot of really interesting ideas about houses. So I'm going to blow up my screen again because I want to show you guys a couple templates from this. A lot of the original colors from these things, I got to try to be delicate because this is one of my prized possessions. I try to collect original source material for this stuff. So again, what's interesting is that these are sort of like working class homes that you see here. You would not order a big Victorian mansion from a catalog like this. You can certainly order big houses, but what you're going to see is a lot of brown, red, and green roofs, because that was sort of the accent back then. They actually used their roof as an accent, and you're going to see a lot of earthy, putty-ish, ochre colors on there. Like this one is just a two-tone gray and white. Let me pull out another one here. So very, very historic. Houses like this with a green kind of wood shakes on the top. When I'm restoring historic homes in my areas, my God, do I see this color of green, this foresty, earthy kind of pea green on houses. This is probably one of the most used color on historic homes ever. Very, very rarely did you see any blues. Like you see a two-tone sort of green. The body color of this house is actually not that dissimilar from the big green mansion that we're doing here. But again, you can see bright green roofs, ochre, putty-ish colors like that. Just beautiful, beautiful homes like this. And I love it because it's, yeah, like I said, it's original source material. They even have a little Mediterranean style house like this here. I mean, this is not dissimilar, folks, to what's going on today. So if you think you're breaking some trends with, oh, white house, black window sashes, things like that. Hey, folks, 100 years ago, this was a working class house that you could order from a catalog. So again, if you think you're doing anything new, I mean, my house is the same thing. It's a white house, creamy white house with black window sashes, kind of that sort of thing. And yeah, so if you think you're coming up with something new, all this stuff has been done before. So this is one of the most common color schemes that I've seen. So we see an ochre, putty, yellow kind of color, a pale color. We see that all the time. And Mark Johnson, I know you would get a kick out of stuff like this. And I got a whole rack of these suckers and other source material over there too. So beautiful, beautiful homes. And I love this too, because even on the front, practical homes from 1922. So it's a cool thing. Now, back to our big project here. Let's talk about the actual process of prepping. Let's get back here. And I got a whole bunch of pictures to show you guys. So then we'll go through some, we'll go through some questions as well too here. Okay, so when we approach a house like this, number one concern is we are an RRP lead certified renovator. So this is a contentious law with a lot of painters, because when you read it, it's very hard to comply with it 100%. But the general idea of the law is stay safe. You know, you want to keep people. There's a very good chance that homes older than 1978 have some sort of lead paint somewhere on them. So you want to safeguard your people, the people who own the home, and all the neighbors around there. So yeah, that's what we do. We do the full RRP prep. It involves, we do not power wash these houses, because if you read the law and comply with it, you have to reclaim all the water and then dispose of it properly, which is not something that is possible unless you go through some insanely tall lengths like that. So we scrape and we sand and we use lots of plastic and we collect lots of chips and we just do all sorts of just cleanup and stuff. And there's a constant cleanup process to keep all this stuff from everywhere. I like a clean job site anyway, but that's kind of what we've been doing. So now, once everything has been scraped and sanded, theoretically, you know, when you have a house like this, it's probably going to be, what I normally say is 70 to 75% of the paint will be removed with a scraper. Sometimes people call them pull scrapers, etc. Another 20 to 30% will be taken off by sanders. The mechanical action will kind of loosen some of the extra stuff. And in that process, you kind of have a scraper or a putty knife in your hand and a sander hooked up to a HEPA vac in your other one. And you kind of go for it like that and loosen stuff. And yeah, we took a lot of paint off this house. Like I said, it had had some horrible things done to it over the years. I think the last contractor who did it, when I'm up in the peaks there, you can see when it got high, when it got a little sketchy up there, quality didn't follow. So that is definitely not the homeowner's fault. That is the last craftsperson who did this house. I assume they were working from a ladder and they couldn't reach a lot of stuff. So after the RRP prep is done, all the caution tapes, all the signs, all the safety stuff, then this house is basically just a standard repaint, give or take. So we can get rid of all the EPA RRP lead stuff, and then we can start priming. So what we did last week, we spent 3.5 days prepping this house with my people. We had about 370 hours. You always have to slush it a little bit because there's a whole bunch of logistics. So maybe 370 to 400 hours of prep into this house. And then starting Thursday at about noon after lunch, we had a big boss lunch here with a whole bunch of the crews. Then they started priming. So here's my theory on a lot of this stuff. What we did to prep this house was the equivalent of about 10 weeks of labor for one human being. So when you think about the Minnesota summer here, maybe we have May 1st to October 31st, May, June, July, August, September, October. You basically have 6 months to paint the outside of a house. We put the equivalent of 10 weeks for one person into prepping the outside of this house. So basically, if you got this job and you're a single person painter, you have just spent a good portion, almost half of your summer, just prepping this house. Now you have to paint it. You might, if you're not a go-getter, you will likely run out of summer before you're able to complete a project like this. So very important. We are specially set up to this. We have access. We have our W-2 employees. We have our subcontractors, things like this. We can marshal a small army to do stuff like this. So it's an awesome process. On this project, I'm using it for training for my company. I want these young apprentices who haven't been around in the trades long to get to touch fine craftsmanship, to get to marvel and awe at a home like this, like I did when I was a little kid. And I want them to appreciate the work that goes into this. So my thinking is we're going to take likely the biggest project we're going to do this year. I'm going to lead it. We're going to get all the crews there. And we're going to go crazy on this house. We're going to do the finest craftsmanship we can do. We're going to turn it in. I hope we win some national awards for it. And these young people then will go forth this summer and say, there is never going to be a job again this summer that is that intense as that. I mean, think about a 20-year-old house with hardy board. There might be a little peeling paint on the bottom of a garage door jamb or a door jamb, and then they mask off windows and paint. They will be clicking their heels and laughing when they get to a house like that after 3.5 days of scraping and sanding on something like this. So that's the thinking. Let's do this. Let's do it as a team. Let's get a whole bunch of people and go forth. I want all my crews that were on this originally to finish out on this project. So we'll probably keep them here. But on smaller historic restorations, when we have just a kind of 4-square farmhouse or something, the theory is I like to load up people right away to get all the prep done. And then we can parse off some crews. And once the painting starts, we can only have we only need 1 or 2 crews on a house like that. So, but it's hard mentally to stay in the game for scraping for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. So what I like to do, pile them up. You can even get on this one, we averaged about 3 people a side. And we basically said, this is your side. You don't have to scrape the whole house, scrape this side. And it's an easier bite-sized chunk of that elephant that you're trying to eat to do. So that's kind of our that's kind of the history of and our ideas of how to prep these homes. So I will show you. Let's get another one in here. And I'm going to have to go through my images here. Okay, so this is a properly prepped piece of siding. So we scrape, we sand, we scrape again, we do stuff like this. This is what we want to get it to. So it's a little bit subjective with prep. We practice something called reasonable restoration. So a reasonable restoration, here, let me just fix my screen here. Reasonable restoration is something that I am very intentional with the clients, because there is a reasonable amount of time that we're going to spend to scrape and sand. You could scrape and sand forever until this house had no wood. That's not what we're estimating here. What I say, I make a clear delineation for clients. You have museum style restoration where we will use safe chemical stripper. We will strip this entire house down to bare wood. We will assess, repair, consolidate, prime the whole thing, caulk all the cracks, and then paint. Most people do not want to do that. That's a summer full of work. Most people don't have a checkbook to support a job like that. So what we do is reasonable restoration. Say, we're going to spend at least half this job prepping the house. So they say, well, how much paint are you going to get off? What are you going to do? Say, listen, this is our standard. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get every reasonable amount of paint come off. You are not going to find another contractor who's going to do a more thorough job of this. I know I can't say, here's a clear endpoint. Here's a clear deliverable we can give you, but this is called reasonable restoration. Of this bid, we will spend most of the time prepping your house, and then we will spend some time at the end painting it as well. That's what I consider, if you're on Facebook right now looking, that is a properly prepped surface, minus maybe a little brushing and cleaning and stuff like that, ready for primer. So let's go to this now. Now, this is what I would consider one of the most critical stages of the entire project, the prime phase. So yes, scraping, sanding, very important. But if you mess up this prime phase, all that scraping and sanding was for naught. Now, this is something where, again, I follow the data. A very close friend of mine said something in the last couple of weeks that still resonates with me. Respect the data. When your data comes in and you know it's good, you must respect it. You must honor that data. You must make data-driven decisions off of it. For those of you who know me, I'm a fan of oil primer. We only use oil primer on wood and cabinets, trim inside houses, because it sticks better than anything else we can do. It stops bleeding better than anything else, and it sands well. Water-based primers will usually do one of those. They will usually stick or sand well or block tannins, usually not block tannins. But you usually can't find in a water-based primer that will do all three. I felt sneeze coming on. Sorry, guys. So basically, you would assume that I use oil primer on all this stuff. Now, the data, respect the data. For over a decade, I've been restoring barns, churches, historic homes, all sorts of exterior wood-sided projects. About a decade ago, I started experimenting with using water-based pigmented primers. So I don't use peel bonds. I don't use any of those clear water-based rubbery sort of, thicker things like that. I'm still a fan of something that soaks into the wood. So the data is, I have never once had a peeling issue or a tannin bleed issue with white water-based primer on historic structures. It should not make sense. It should not make sense. Yes, Jason Paris, respect the emoticons. Respect the data, Jason Paris. Okay, folks, this should not work as well as it should. All right. But when we were restoring barns, we had one summer where we restored like 4 or 5 barns. And that oil primer was so sticky and so like it just wore your wrist out, back brushing and back rolling it into there. I thought, you know what? Let's test out water-based primer. We got water-based primer, white water-based primer, or when we're doing barns, we do either super dark red, super dark gray to kind of bridge the gap of the color. And we put it on, and our production rate was legitimately twice as fast with water-based than oil-based. Oil-based just has so much drag in it; it doesn't naturally fill the pores. Water-based primer is like grease lightning; it almost feels lubricated trying to put it in there. So we could prime a barn twice as fast with water-based primer than we could with oil. And in the end, I was so nervous about these barns. I thought these white barns we were doing would just bleed those tobacco stains, because you got to think, there's no insulation. There's no vapor barrier. On the inside is hay and animals and things like that. And moisture is emanating out. I thought, God, there's no way this is going to work, but we got to try it. Never once had a failure with that stuff. So we switched over all of our historic restoration stuff to white or gray or whatever tinted water-based primers. And we have had the best luck ever with that stuff. Now, the key here is I set up a demo for my people before I had to leave for Nashville that we apply with a sprayer and back brush. The most important thing you could ever do to a historic home like this is to fill the pores. I made up a little cheat sheet for my people. We take some rosin paper, I tape it to a board, I write some quick notes, we brief everybody on it, I show them a demo, I show them how to do it the wrong way. I'll upload some pictures later. But I basically show them that this is how we do it. A sprayer is nothing more than a mechanical means to get paint from the can to the wall. This is not fine finishing. We're not looking for finish strokes. We're not looking for anything else. We are looking to soak, saturate, and just consolidate all this historic wood on this house. So you can see the demo that I did here. Fully scraped, fully cleaned, fully sanded piece. We laid on about 2 to 3 quarts of primer over the top of this wood here, and you manipulate it in there with that brush, just getting every crack and crevice filled. You can get rid of 90% of the things that you would need to caulk by filling with actual primer. And then we use a duration flat on the outside of this stuff too. So that's a super thick paint. That'll take up a lot of that. I do not want to caulk anything on these old houses if I don't have to. So I don't want that rubbery stuff all over, but we prime first. We try to fill all the cracks we can. We manipulate it in there. It's likely that we're probably going to use 45 to 50 gallons of primer on this house to fill all that stuff. Once we saturate it, once it dries, then we assess for caulking. And one of the things I want to talk about is, well, let's see if I got another. Got a little more prep here. So after priming, then we caulk. It's very, very important that you caulk only after priming. If you've ever put caulking over bare wood and then painted over the top of it, it will come loose. And those are those jobs, it's almost comical. You can grab that caulking at the bottom of that corner board and zipper it right off the house. It just flies right off the house because it doesn't stick well to bare wood. So we prime everything first and then caulk and then do the 2-part epoxy fillers. Very important. Let's see what we got. David, what water-based primer? 30 years of tears with oil from Instagram. Yes. So I am a huge fan of all the oil primers. We rifle through so much oil primer. But my go-to over the last bunch of years has been Sherwin-Williams latex all-purpose primer. Honestly, I've tried them all, folks. We've had an awesome luck with Kills Premium Water Base. That recently got changed to Kills 3. That is an insanely good product, super thick too. What I really like, I should say, I've never had failures with Kills either. What I really like about the Sherwin-Williams latex all-purpose primer is that it's very thin and you can see that stuff sink into that house. It almost pulls in. So on Facebook, I'm showing you this water table board here. There's this flat ledger that comes out from a 45 from the house at the bottom of the siding. And that's sort of to like shed water away from the house. That is a piece of wood that's 150 years old that's sliding out from the house like this. I showed my people a demo. I took one section and I primed it and back brushed it. I did one section where, I sprayed and back brushed one section where I only sprayed, and I brought the whole, all the crews over and I showed them a demo how we do this. And I showed them the difference between what a horrible job only spraying does versus spraying and back rolling. It looks like some pieces on those bare pieces of wood, you spray primer over the top really heavy, by the way. I usually spray about 2 inches away from the wood to just lay it on there because you're going to back brush it anyway. It's soaked in and it looks like there was pink wood still there. So when we back brushed it though, it filled in those, manipulated it, physically dragged the bristles over the bare wood and things like that and soaked in. There's big checks. If you've ever seen historic wood like that, there's usually big checks and cracks in it. When you back brush and stuff over that, you can almost take a brush, and I was showing my people how on nail holes, you can actually putty primer into that because that's going to stabilize that better. That loose primer is going to soak in, consolidate that wood. And it's such a good substrate. It's such a good substrate. So that's what I showed my people. If you just spray a house like this, it's a worthless paint job. You need to get that in there. Now, theoretically, what we do is once the pores are filled, then you can only spray. That's fine. But you have to fill the pores, which is a very, very time-consuming process in a house like this. But it is the way to do it. And I want to show you some pictures before we get to top coating here. So this is the Schwartz restoration I did. We won a couple national awards for this a bunch of years ago. Me and about 3 other people restored this over the course of a couple of weeks. And it's a brick mainly house in New Ulm, and it's got wood, really fancy stuff. Now you guys are missing out on IG here. So Mike Chavez, no bleeding. Sorry, buddy. It's just, I follow the data. This shouldn't work. Water-based primer has never failed me. I've never had a bleeding issue. There's no reason it should work, but it does. And I have 0 data points to affect that other thing. Now, the only, sorry, we'll get back to this historic restoration here, but the only other data point I would give you is that I would not use white water-based primer on any new wood. For historic wood, I'm perfectly fine with it. I have no data points to point to anything else other than full success. But if somebody had a house where it's like, hey, it's 15 years old, we have cedar siding, we want you to, scrape and prime and paint it, I would use oil primer on that stuff, because newer wood is a kind of a disaster. And if it wasn't back primed originally, it's probably going to be a basket case. So, oh, Mark Johnston, glad I'm watching. I've been moving towards latex primers from oil, but I've been feeling very nervous about it, especially on window sashes, which is always badly weathered. Mark, you will not be disappointed in this stuff. I wish I could give you, and Mark's going to actually be holding some classes. I just saw you put 2 classes up there. I think there's going to be a historic wood finish in October and an exterior finishing in July. So, Mark, I would definitely say that, again, just my data points, but coming from an old house nerd like you, old house nerd like me, give it a try. I have no data points to the otherwise, to the contrary. So, all right. So, you guys are looking at this beautiful historic restoration I did. We did the same thing, except we used Loxon primer on the brick first, spot prime the brick, and then we used duration flat on the outside. Homeowner was kind enough to ask me back to look at a few things and maintenance issues. The only problem on this historic restoration is that new garage they added on to the back. Well, they didn't add it on, like probably 15 years ago, another homeowner added it on, put wood siding on it, didn't back prime it, put some crappy latex paint over it, and it's peeling like crazy. We fixed that. And now there's rot from the inside. There's a flat roof over the top, and there's water leaking behind some of the siding, and there's a few bits of rot. Our paint job is holding up insanely well. I wanted to show you guys what a proper sort of, what I look for in old house restoration here. So what I'm showing you on Facebook is a 4 to 5 year old south-facing windowsill, 150-year-old piece of wood that was so badly rotted, I had to basically rebuild it. So what you'll see is on the bottom portion here, I actually rebuilt the whole underside. This historic sill is probably this thick. You guys got to get to Facebook over there to see this stuff. This is so cool. This is a picture from a couple weeks ago. This is a 4 to 5 year painted windowsill, south facing. A wood windowsill, again, is nearly flat and water sits right on it. The sun bakes on it all year. I had to rebuild the bottom. It was so rotted against the stone. They had this beautiful sandstone, limestone plinths underneath it. Water got in there, rotted it all out. I dug it out. You could actually reach your hand in there and start digging out rotted wood. I used at that time, 3M had come out with a brand new sort of like wood filler system, consolidant, 2-part wood filler and things like that. So they sent me a bunch of cases and I used it. It worked awesome. So that consolidant, I just soaked the wood with it like that. And it's sort of like, it dried it out. It just, I don't know, not better word for than consolidate. It just soaks into the wood, makes it hard, makes it acceptable to this stuff. And then I mixed up all my 2-part filler. And I basically like, if you've ever seen a brick mason put in mortar, they have kind of like a plate of mortar and this little tool, and they put it in the joints like this. I was taking this stuff and just mushing it in there, letting it dry, scraping it up, mushing it in there again. I rebuilt the front of this stuff. That stuff is holding up great. It did shrink a little bit, so it's only an aesthetic flaw now, but you can see the difference between the front of the wood and the front of the putty. I assume over time we had so much putty in there that over the course of years and years, it just shrunk a little, but it's still sealed. It's still good. And what I look for is I basically grind the tops of those wood sills down all the way, because those are the first things. When I look at a historic home, when Mr. Schwartz called me and said, hey, Nick, there's some parts on the house I want you to look at, the first thing I did when I got to that house is I'm looking at those sills. That's the first thing that's going to peel, because it's almost flat, water and snow and ice sit on it, and the sun hits it. These things look awesome. I mean, this is better than I expected. To get 4 to 5 years out of a 150-year-old windowsill, south-facing, water sitting on it in Minnesota is insane. So what we do is we grind them all the way down. I get them almost down to bare wood. And then we do that water-based soaking system, where a primer system, where I just saturate it in there. I fill it all. It's almost filled level with just primer, because that's way more stable than any kind of acrylic or latex caulking and things like that. And then we do the 2 finish coats. The biggest problem with historic homes is always where the side casings come down and the wood sills meet. Those are always going to move because you got this type of wood with grain going this way. The house is moving around it. So when that crack opens up, it lets a little water in. And sometimes in the summer when it's humid, it swells and closes. So you can see a little bit of that going on here. But honestly, I was amazed how good these things stood up. So let's look at... So again, another thing that I looked at was the historic balustrade on this house. So some of it was brand new. There was a restoration carpenter there working on it while we were there. And then we were there sort of restoring the rest of it. Super ornate. Like if you look at the front of this house, all this balustrade on the front, monster porch, all this intricate woodwork, spandrels, things like that. I wanted this stuff to really, really do well. So again, scrape, sand, prime, and we did 3 top coats over the top of this stuff because I really wanted this stuff to cake in there. And honestly, again, when you have all these little tiny wood joints coming together that open up and flat parts and things like that, it's just prime for rot and peeling. And this stuff looks as good as the day we put it on. So it was time well spent there, and I could not be more proud of how this restoration has been holding up. And there's a placard right on my wall there from 2 national awards we won from it. So I'm very proud of this stuff. And we know how much hard work goes into this stuff. So, okay, let's talk about our big green restoration again. So let's see if I got another. Yeah, some prep work here. So big green restoration. Now, basically, after again, I spent a lot of time on the prep and the priming. And after that, it's a paint job. Now, you got to be thorough. You got to be good. You got to process it in the right way. But we do 2 coats of a self-priming paint that's supposedly a 1-coat coverage like that, belt and suspenders like that. We love our duration flat. Once it's primed, we'll prep the house. And I did a roof demo here. I'll hide this one so you guys can see it a little better. But I did a roof demo of how we prep off roofs. So there's some old galvanized flashing on this roof here. We put duct tape down on the shingles first, as it'll stick to the shingles better. Then we use blue tape and either 12-inch paper or 12-inch plastic. I happen to find a case of 12-inch paper buried in our shop. So I thought, let's use this stuff up. So when I did a mock-up demo of roof prep for my people to make sure they understood how to do this, I laid out the duct tape and then blue frog tape, with 12-inch paper. You run that, then the blue tape will stick to the duct tape. And then I use duct tape to secure the other side of the paper down to the shingles as well. You just kind of mush it into the shingle grit like that, just to keep it from blowing away and stuff. Then you take a canvas drop cloth and lay it over the edge of the paper. The paper gives you that buffer. If you just lay a drop cloth on shingles, that 2,000, 3,000 PSI coming out of your sprayer will pop that drop cloth back. The spray and the force of the airless will come and just pop that drop cloth back. So that 12-inch buffer lets that sort of stuff stay. It's a clean place. And then we have the drop cloth there to protect the roof. And obviously we don't stand on the drop cloths. We make a little place where you can stand on the shingles. We don't put ladders on drop cloths on roofs either. But on these old houses, roof logistics are a big part of what we do here. So we do have 2 aerial lifts working on this one to do most of the bulk of that stuff. But there are some roofs that we do have to kind of create some platforms, get a bunch of cleats put in, a whole bunch of chicken ladders, which I will show you guys next here. So this is hard to see. I couldn't get a great perspective shot of it, but what you're seeing is a dormer and then a roof there. So a dormer is basically siding. There's a roof and then there's siding over the roof. So these are always the trickiest places for painters to get on houses because you got to put some ladders on an angle on a roof. You're usually high up in the air. It's tricky. We use something called chicken ladders, which are basically big extension ladders where you pop the 2 sections apart. We put one of those red roof hooks with a wheel on top, and we slide it up the roof, hook it over the ridge of the house, and then that ladder actually stays flat right to the side of the house and or side of the roof. And then you can just run up and down it. So they call them chicken ladders basically because if you ever seen a chicken ramp up to a chicken coop, it's basically a piece of wood with a bunch of cleats on it. Same kind of idea like that. And what we do is same thing. We got our 12-inch paper or plastic. We lay the drop cloths on the roof. Then we lay the chicken ladders over the top because, again, you don't want a drop cloth on top of a ladder where you're climbing up and down. But that will stay in perpetuity till the project's done. Perfectly safe way to do it. And then you can actually put ladders in there with pivot tools, or we call them wedges or black boxes, and then get some ladders up there. And then we just apply 2 coats, finish up, and then clean up for the project. So I mean, I'm happy to take any questions you guys have about historic restorations. I'm just going to let's go through here. We'll go through Facebook. I usually go through Instagram first. We'll go through this. Mike Danahy, Kevin Hayes. Good morning, everybody. Paul Gimlin. Paul Gimlin, come to Buffalo. I'm going to be very close to you in the second week of June. So look me up. I'll be there. Travel a little bit. Or if you want me to come to Buffalo exactly, you can get a hold of Marcia or Sydney at the PCA or contact me and we can get an event set up. So, all right, Paul Stein, how's it going? Paul Victor Gimlin, is it oil-based paint on the house? Yes. There's likely casing-based paint, milk paint. There could be calcimine. There's water-based paint. There's definitely oil paint, all sorts of stuff on this house. This house spans 150 years. So basically, this house spans, I mean, it's about then, give or take. And Benjamin Moore has been around since about then. It's likely this house might have been painted with homemade paint originally. In 1880s, there wasn't a dearth in these rural areas of ready mixed paint. So there might have been something just concocted on site. You never know. There could have been some ready mixed paint involved with that. But Mark Johnson, who's watching, might have a better idea there. So Jonathan LaFontaine, you have to have at least 3 colors. Jonathan, if you listen to the first part of this, you absolutely do not. In fact, it would be better with 1, honestly. Jonathan, my oldest house is 1839. They're pretty plain, and we did repairs. We had to use special nails. So I get involved in Department of Interior, historic restoration sometimes. And I was just doing an estimate for one the other day. It had it's a tiny little cottage, this tiny like single level prairie cottage out here that a historic restoration or a historic society is going to restore. And a historic architect got involved. And there was a 128-page report about every piece of siding on the house that had to be done different. And I'm happy to do that stuff. But there's a big difference between private clients, say, restore my house, and the Department of Interior of the United States putting down guidelines for historic restoration. I've done both. Actually, with Mark Johnson, too. We restored an old jail house, which is pretty cool. All right. Johnny Dater, how's it going, man? Jonathan LaFontaine, you always use oil primer. Just holds up better. Yes, people have all sorts of data points all over the place. Oil primer would hold up as well too. But the problem is we have lots of people. I want them to be safe. I want production to be high, and I want a good job for the client. And we have a good data point on both. So DNA painting. We have Victorians, 25 years old, still holding together. This is going to be very hard to switch out of oil. So this is not me saying oil is bad. I still use oil primer all the time, but you do have another thing you can try. And I would say just always start on, you don't want to take on the big green restoration and test out something like this. Start on a smaller farm shed, start on a garage, start on something smaller where you can keep an eye on it, close to your home and things like that. But honestly, it's a great process. So Evan, how's it going in Texas, man? Oh, Ryan Koischel from Minnesota. We just finished a historic home on Marine on St. Croix. Tough work, lots of peeling paint, primer, backbrush, backroll, then duration. Yes, man. Ryan, I got to meet Ryan for the first time at the last gathering of Minnesota painters. And dude, nice guy. I love your work too, man. So keep it up. We have lots of Victorians here. Sam Clement. The green is definitely familiar. Is there lead-based paint? So it doesn't matter, Mark. We have to treat homes like that. I treat them like they are for safety reasons anyway, as if they do. So kind of doesn't matter to me. All right, Holly Barlow, have you ever had to address the wood planks touching the shingles on the roof like a chicken ladder pick? No flashing on the roof I'm working on. My carpenter says he wants to redo the whole thing. That sounds unnecessarily pricey. We'll be using Rain Refresh. Oh, Rain Refresh is a good product. It's in the outside of this house, the Slavik house. So let me make sure I understand this. Have you ever had to address the wood planks touching the shingles on the roof line in the chicken? Oh, yes, yes. So all the lap siding that comes into contact there, those are normally the first things that rot on a house because think about it. You have a roof here. Let me see if we can do this. You have an angled roof here, and you have a piece of siding that's coming into the roof, cut at a 45-degree angle, and you have open end grain, which are basically the capillary action will soak up water like that. And nobody ever touches the end of that stuff with primer. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It certainly didn't happen 150 years ago. So when you see these boards here, if you're looking on Facebook, we spend a ton of time prepping those things. And honestly, these are in really good shape. This is old growth wood. It's probably pine, cedar, or fir, and it's in great shape. So honestly, if you have some rot, fix them. or if you have some rot, you can always cut out a section, replace a board, this or that. If it's just a little bit of rot, you can always use 2-part epoxy filler. But honestly, you just want to jam as much primer in there as possible. So I generally replace wood when there's nothing left to patch. Like if there's the edge of a board gone or a whole section of a board gone, you don't want to rebuild a portion of board with putty. If there's a hole in the middle of the board or a big crack or a check or a rot around a nail in the middle of a board, that's perfect for the 2-part epoxies or restoration fillers and things like that. But you don't want to be rebuilding the end of a board. That's just like a big slug of putty that if it's not adhered, if it doesn't have things around it to contain it, it'll likely just fall off in a bunch of years. So I'm very careful with that. But Holly, certainly if you want to send me pictures of your house too, I'd be happy to give an opinion as well too. So, all right. Mike Gallus, do you take special precautions while working on houses with lead-based paint? I am a lead renovator, a certified lead renovator. And yes, we take all the precautions when we do this stuff. So, okay. Ryan Keuschel, best way to contain paint chips on an old stucco when power washing and paint just keeps coming off. We had a home where we power washed it, and to check in, the paint was everywhere, lots of cleaning hours. So we just assume that part of that stuff, like, okay, when we take a house that's from 1998, it's a cedar-sided house. Somebody did a horrible job. They just committed sins all over this house, crappy latex paint right over bare wood. It's coming off in potato chips. We've done a couple things in the past. A lot of times, if it's in a rural area and there's not a lot of close neighbors, we'll just power wash the living daylights out of this because it's not a lead house. We can power wash, we can do whatever. Chips are going to go everywhere. The next day when it's dry, we come with an army of people, trash bags, shop vacs, and we're picking them all out of the grass and rocks. We're scooping up dirt and things like that and sifting out stuff and getting them out of there. That's honestly one of the best. One of the things we've done with a lot of success too is I bought a couple bolts of window screen, 10, 12-foot window screen, and we stapled it to the bottom board of the house, rolled that 10 or 12-foot window screen out, and then that caught a lot of the chips. There is no perfect way when you're pressure washing a house. Technically, we can't pressure wash lead houses unless you contain all the water. So we're talking about newer houses. When we do that, chips are just going to go everywhere, man. And it's just a big cleanup process. So I would say, one apprentice, maybe 2 apprentices for a half day, an entire day. Normally they're just picking up chips at the end of a big project like that is normally just expected. And it just kind of is what it is. But in return, what you get is a beautifully prepped house like that. So let's see what else we got here. Jonathan LaFontaine, ever run across zinc chromate? They had a surplus. No, I have not. All right. All right, guys. Well, let's go through. Let's make sure I didn't miss anything on Instagram. Most painters, oh yeah, Mark Johnson on Instagram. Most painters were still mixing their own paint in 1880s, but used prepared pigments. Oh yeah, there we go. Mark knows. He's a genius about this stuff. All right. Oh man, thanks for the kind words, everybody on Instagram. This is awesome here. All right, folks. Well, that's about it. Oh wait, one more here. Remnant restoration. Hey, there we go. How do you determine when to caulk, where to remove caulk? Have any rules in determining that? Caulking in the wrong areas can lead to paint failure. It can be hard to tell what to keep. Okay, last question, and then we'll call it a day here. I'm actually going to take my little daughter Toodles to dance practice this morning after this. So, okay. So I do not want to caulk houses. The best scenario would be every crack is filled already with either primer or paint or whatever else, and you don't need to caulk. Generally, we have two ways that I approach fixes: carpentry and caulking on a house. I'm very clear with a client. There is caulking and carpentry that stops bugs and water and animals from getting in your house. And then there's aesthetic caulking and carpentry. If you expect every pinhole, every fine line crack in your house to be filled perfectly like a solid shell, that's an aesthetic fix. And that's something way different than me saying there's a woodpecker hole on this side, there's a failed joint here, there's a tiny little nail hole here, there's this. There's a squirrel chewed the end of a faceboard that we're going to fill with some caulking just to stop that getting in there. There's a huge difference between remediation caulking and carpentry, where you stop water, bugs, and animals from getting into a house, and then aesthetic stuff. So be very clear with your clients about that. I'll go back to a picture here. My goal with these houses is to basically eliminate caulking. But knowing that we will not eliminate caulking. What we're basically going for is, from experience, I know that priming will fill 90% of the things that most people would caulk on a historic home like this. The problem is 2 coats of duration over the top of that will fill probably 8% more. So you're left with about 2% left over. The problem is you can't caulk after top coat. So you got to guess. Now we go everything over 1/8 of an inch or more. Generally on a house. And we're looking for places where water can infiltrate. So we do not caulk the bottoms of lap siding. We do not caulk the butt joints in lap siding unless they're really big and something could get in there. But those boards need to move. And that's where you get those huge failures where caulking will come out, or the paint will just like, you need to let that stuff breathe, because water will get into a house and it's got to find a way to get out. So what we're looking for is anywhere where water might sit. We're looking at tops of windowsills, water table boards, corner boards, things like that, where water's going to hit faceboards too. And then after that, you just have to say, you really need to get some idea from the client. So we actually separate out sanding and caulking on an estimate, because some people don't care. They're like, yeah, pressure wash my house, prime it, put some paint on, it's rough cedar, we don't need to sand it. With this house, I actually line itemed everything on here from sanding. Now, I kind of, walk through the process where here's the scraping. We could do that. If you want us to sand the entire house, here's what that's going to be like. And then after that, we include a certain amount of caulking. I'll say, listen, I'm just taking an assessment here from my experience. We're probably going to spend 8 hours caulking the worst things. We're going to pick out the 8 worst hours of places on this house and do that. If you want us to go through and do the next level of caulking, then I put a separate line item there that says, listen, then we'll start inspecting these joints and this and that. We still haven't got to the aesthetic part where every single pore and thing is filled on a house or leveled out. But that's just sort of something where it's always tough because it's subjective. There's not a start and a finish line. If you have a tan powder room and you want it painted gray, there's a start line, there's a middle, and there's a finish line. And everybody can agree it was tan, now it's gray, clean lines, good finish, moving on. That's subjective. Scraping, sanding, caulking is always subjective, because a homeowner might think, well, yeah, you're just going to take it all down to bare wood, aren't you? And a painter might say, well, I'm just going to scratch a little on the bottom, put it on, whatever. You're not going to get it all, so you have to come across this is why I call my process reasonable restoration. If I was to say this is a pure restoration, I would say, get the tent out, because we're going to be here for 4.5 months. We're going to strip this house down to bare wood, consolidate all the wood, assess it, repair it, and start from scratch and give it a 20-year paint job. That's not going to work for most homeowners, especially of homes this size. So that's basically what we do. You just have to define reasonable restoration for your people. Now, when I say reasonable restoration, this isn't cut rate restoration. Lord knows we spend almost 400 hours scraping and sanding this house, getting it ready for paint. So this is not some, half priced, half sort of done job. But you need to say reasonably, we're going to do an amazing job on this, and likely we'll win, or at least turn in this for a national award this next year. The only other step past that, we can do a little more work in there, but really it's that, or we completely strip it down, museum restoration. There's not a lot we can do in there. That's just half steps. So, all right, folks. Thank you so much for watching here. I do appreciate it. I'm having so much fun at these master's classes. I'm inspired by the people we're meeting. I always walk away with lots of takeaways and things like that. So I really look forward to traveling the country in the coming months here and pressing hands with everybody. And I can't thank you guys enough for watching. So we will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching.